Welcome to the podcast Sustainability, teaching about sustainable cities and communities in the classroom.
Hi everyone, this is Eric. Today we're talking about SDG 11.7, providing access to safe and inclusive green and public spaces, one of the most important targets of SDG 11. The goal is to provide universal access to safe, inclusive, and accessible green and public spaces by 2030. Our special guest today is Ms. Mara Rose, the CEO of Boundless Landscapes.
Hi there.
Boundless Landscapes is a public benefit corporation. It aims to turn the world into a garden by converting lawns and underutilized community spaces into thriving food gardens. Hi, Ms. Mara. Would you tell us more about yourself and your project?
Sure. Thank you for having me on. So Boundless Landscapes it's a new project. We actually piloted it this last summer in 2019 in Boulder, Colorado in the United States. We really piloted with a lot of questions about the feasibility, and we embarked on this adventure very much as sort of a science experiment. We had a lot of hypotheses that we were going to test, and we found that many of the things that we were hoping would be true were true. And so I'll tell you more about those details, but based on the results of our pilot project, we're actually working to expand to hundreds of gardens in Boulder, Colorado in the coming year, with the idea that we will grow and expand to other cities in the years after that. And our model is really, in many ways, it's not a new idea. It's building on a long history of urban gardening, of community gardening, of victory gardens and things like that. But it's looking at this opportunity to take spaces that are, in many cases, at least here, lawns, and turning them into food. And in doing that, we're also trying to build more resilient and connected communities and engage youth within those communities to be agents of change and to learn entrepreneurial work skills and learn how to grow food, which is a really important skill that young people should have, that all of us should have. So those are all big pieces of what we're trying to do. And we also are really committed to figuring out a way to build a financially sustainable model that is scalable, because the size of this problem and the immense need for, I think, the many pieces of the puzzle that we're working on is so significant that if we don't come up with models that can scale, we're not going to have the desired impact.
Yeah, I think that's very important. Then what inspired you to come up with the idea of Boundless Landscapes?
Yeah, so again, it's definitely not our idea and not a new idea in many ways. I actually worked in school gardens and community gardens about 25 years ago in New Orleans and California, and I saw at that time a lot of the amazing benefits of it, and at that time I was working with youth, and I just saw how young people's eyes lit up when they made the connections between food they put in their mouths and where it actually came from. So I remember one time when a young person looked at a sunflower and had an aha moment that sunflower seeds that he ate often came from that flower, and it just sort of blew his mind. And so seeing the excitement, the enthusiasm, and the capacity to do this work among young people has always stuck with me. I ended up doing many other things over those 25 years, but then last year I was connected with my two co-founders, a man named Sepp Kamvar, who's a computer scientist, an artist, an entrepreneur, and then my other co-founder, Josh Tostason, who's worked in sustainability for his whole adult life, and among other things, he ran the Rainforest Alliance certification program internationally. And the three of us spent many months just trying to figure out what our model was. And Sepp, who is a computer scientist, brought the concept of using sort of micro solutions to solve macro problems. So how can we have this sort of a decentralized network, these nodes that exist in communities everywhere that end up together having a really significant impact. And so that idea really informed this idea of micro farms. And so we worked together for many months, kind of brainstorming and coming up with what we thought the model should be, and then decided that the only way we would really know if any of it was viable was by testing it. And that's what we did this summer. But it was, it's very much a response to the need for local food, the need to respond to climate change, and the need to build more resilient, connected communities.
According to Sustainable Development Goal 11.7, how is Boundless Landscapes providing universal access to safe, inclusive, and accessible green and public spaces?
That's a great question. I think one of the fundamental ideas is that we are really inviting people to come into closer connection and relationship with nature. And so I think underlying that goal is the idea that, not only do we need to just have access to it, but we actually need to take some time to settle into connection with nature. And that can be really simple in many ways. It can be about taking a seed and planting it in some dirt and watching it grow and realizing just how profound that is and how easy it is to do. And so many people today think that that's like a really hard, scary thing to do. So, I think starting with something as small as that and just inviting people into connection with nature is a big piece. And what's interesting is we're actually not doing most of our work in public spaces. We are, in some ways, making an invitation to private landowners, homeowners, to, in some ways, share their private land with the public and make it public. And we kind of think that we're asking people to be a little rebellious and to question this idea that, my yard is my yard. I put up a fence and I keep everybody out. And this instead is we're saying, what if you invite teenagers into your yard as a place where they can learn and grow things and create beautiful gardens? What does that feel like, and how different is that psychologically and culturally? In many ways, we are turning private spaces into public spaces and leveraging all this private land that's behind fences and kind of calling it out into the public sphere. I would say there's a number of ways that this sort of universal access piece and inclusive, accessible piece comes into play. One thing, at least in the US, is that there are a lot of older farmers retiring, and there currently are not enough young farmers to fill their shoes. And then at the same time, there's this sort of growing interest in becoming farmers. But a lot of young people can't afford land. And so one of the things that we're really excited about, the woman who currently leads our farming efforts, she is 21 years old and she wants to be a farmer, and she wouldn't be in a position to buy land for herself right now. But we're able to offer her a farm, and it's a different kind of farm. It's a dispersed farm made up of a bunch of people's yards, but she suddenly has land that she gets to tend and care for and build her skills around and share her gifts with others through. And so that's really exciting for us, that we can offer land to people. I would say the teen piece of what we're doing is really important. So we bring on teenagers to be our apprentices in the summer. So they work anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks with us in the summertime. For many of them, they're 15 to 17 years old, perhaps down to 14 years old. For many of them, this will be their first job. We take this responsibility really seriously because we think young people today, many of them in our community, aren't developing job skills. They're focused on academics, they're focused on extracurricular activities, but one of the things that we believe is really important is that they learn how to work and work hard, and have customer service skills and entrepreneurial skills. So the teens that work with us, they chose to do this project and have to be at work at 7:30 in the morning in the summer, when a lot of their peers might still be asleep. They chose to do this job that really put them out as leaders within the community. So they run our farm stand, which is a weekly farm stand, and they are serving the customers, answering questions, explaining our farming techniques. So they're learning these really tangible skills, which is exciting. We're also engaging college students and graduate students as interns and fellows. So they're coming and learning these skills as well, which is really exciting. And then we also invite the broader community in for special events. So we had a sheet mulching party for our biggest farm this fall at the end of the season. And we had a number of community members of all ages come and help with that process and learn what it means to build soil and to employ regenerative farming techniques in a community. And then I think the last part I'd say is the visibility of what we're doing, I think, invites everyone in the community into an increased understanding of just the cycles of nature, the process of growing food, and just understanding things like, oh, that's what a sunflower looks like. And so when we have one of our micro farms on a corner where kids are walking past it to get to school every day, they get to see the kale that's growing from a teeny plant all the way until it gets big, and then it starts to go past and we harvest it, and then they maybe see it on their plates and they're eating it for dinner one night. And so they're invited into that whole cycle, which I think is a real added benefit as well.
So this is actually pretty encouraging and try to involve every teenagers.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we also heard from a lot of the teenagers that we worked, so we only worked with 5 teenagers this summer, but we're going to be doing a larger group in the next years. But what we heard from the teens is we ended up attracting a really diverse group of teenagers in terms of their interests and their social circles. And they all found real joy in connecting with each other around something so authentic. So all of a sudden the cliques and groups and kind of social status melts away when you're out at a farm working together, and you just get to know each other in a really different setting. And it meant that students who maybe, a lot of them went to the same high school, and so students who maybe weren't close developed a bond that was very unique and one that they wouldn't have just in the school setting.
So this project is getting bigger and bigger, and you're trying to extend a larger way, right?
Yes. So we are currently working to grow to as many as 500 farms in Boulder next summer. And the goal is to really create a model here in Boulder, Colorado that can be taken to other cities, initially at least in the US. And the goal is that in each new city it would need to be adapted to be a good fit for that city. So we're really aware of the fact that the model we're building right now works in Boulder and it might not work as well in Nashville, Tennessee. And so we will adapt it to fit into a local community. So that will be a fun and important challenge. But our goal is definitely to grow it because, lawns in America, they're the biggest crop. There's just a lot of work to be done around just addressing a multitude of challenges related to the environment. So we just see this, our growth is important. We feel sort of a moral obligation to grow this thing in order to respond to the needs that are out there.
So far, what is the impact of boundless landscapes on providing green spaces to the communities?
Yeah, so I would say from a impact perspective, again, these spaces already exist. So this summer we were in front yards and backyards and churchyards. But these were, in the case of the church, for example, they had this huge lawn that was used maybe twice a year. And all of a sudden we took a piece of that lawn and turned it into a farm and had people there working on it for 6 months straight. And so I think we're not providing the green spaces, we're converting the green spaces into something that serves the community. What's the value that conversion brings to the communities? And so for us, that's local, accessible, organically grown food. So we're using this land that sat not being used for a long time, and we're using it for food. We're using it to reduce how far food needs to travel to get into our mouths, little by little. One of the things that we were delighted about was that as soon as we started growing at the church, the pollinators showed up. So we had an oregano that started flowering and the bees came immediately, and we had hummingbirds. We had a hummingbird sage bush, and just they immediately started coming, and they came every single morning. And so I think it was, it's this green space in service to what, how is it being used, and how is it being of service to nature more broadly. One of the other interesting facts that I think is very relevant to goals around climate change is petroleum use. So 18 million gallons, and this is what I've read, is that 18 million gallons of petroleum are spilled every year in America just from lawnmowers and other garden equipment. And so, if we start to turn lawns into other things, we're also reducing that. So that's, just an interesting factoid. But, and then again, I think this question of green spaces in service to what is the community piece of it. And I know I've mentioned it a few times already, but I think what we found is that it creates new connections within communities. So whether it's our local farm stand that people can walk to or bike to, and they run into their neighbors and they talk to their neighbors and they meet the teenagers, and they meet teenagers who often get a bad rap in society, and they meet them in this really positive light and see them as agents of change. And so I think leveraging green spaces for all of these purposes, including this sort of stronger sense of community and resilience, or even we're at the corner in a front yard farming, and neighbors are walking by and they're asking us about it, and they're learning about the garlic that's growing all winter, and they're talking to each other, and so it sparks connection and conversation.
I read on your website, one of the goals of Boundless Landscapes is to reduce the use of pesticides and water, support pollinators, and improve biodiversity. How would you like to do to achieve that goal?
Yeah, so we don't use pesticides when we're growing, so we use organic methods. We can't be certified organic because we're growing in really small spaces. It would be impossible for us to be certified organic because of what we're surrounded by. So a next door neighbor might be spraying pesticides, but we don't use pesticides. We use regenerative growing practices, and we educate people about those. We like to think of ourselves as soil farmers first. So really, if you have really healthy soil, you can grow healthy food. And so we spend a lot of time teaching the teens and other community members about soil health and how to build strong, healthy soil. And when you have strong, healthy soil, you have strong plants, and then pests don't see them as targets in the same way. We also introduced beneficial insects like ladybugs. So we release ladybugs into our gardens, and they do things like eat aphids. So we don't need to spray them. We also rotate crops. So like you need pesticides if you're growing the same thing all the time in one spot. But we're rotating crops to help with soil, to help with just keeping insects at bay. We also use row cover, which is like a white cloth that goes over the crops that keeps insects out. So we try and employ other methods that are often take more work, but are built into our model because we think it's so important. We also try to grow regionally adapted plants. So we've actually partnered with a company in town that saves seed from plants, and then from plants that have thrived in this region. So Boulder, Colorado is fairly high elevation. It's very dry. We had our last snow was May 23rd, and our first snow I think was October 9th or 10th. So our growing season can be short. We have hail. We have all sorts of challenges in it gets really hot and dry and then really wet, and it's hard to be a plant in Colorado. So finding seeds from plants that have succeeded here and using those to plant then increase the chances of the success of our crops. So we do that, and we also save our own seeds. So if we have a plant that we grew that really thrived in our climate, we save that seed, and then we can use that seed again in coming years. And we're actually teaching a lot of the folks we work with about how to save seed as well. It's really important to know that you have the capacity to grow a plant, save the seed, and then use that seed to plant the next season, which is something that a lot of people don't realize. We also are really careful. We use water wisely. So just to go back to lawns briefly, we're sort of obsessed with the unconscious psychology of lawns. In the United States, lawns symbolize the leisure class. And I think historically, if you were poor, you grew food, and if you were not poor, you could have a lawn because you didn't need to. And so even though that people aren't necessarily aware of that's what they think and feel, that is very much controlling people's behaviors and observations and judgments. And so a lot of people think that a lawn is beautiful and tidy and that growing food is ugly. So we have some homeowner associations in town where homeowners are literally not allowed to grow food if it's visible to anybody because it's considered untidy and ugly. And I think we're really excited to try to shift this and to get people feeling that growing food is beautiful. And in the case of a lawn, as we said, it's the biggest crop in America. And what it does is it uses lots of pesticides, lots of water, lots of petroleum products, and then it doesn't do anything for pollinators. It doesn't feed us. And so part of the water conversation is let's make sure that when we are using water, we're using it for something really productive. So whether that's for pollinators or to feed humans, I think there's a lot of alternatives. We're also looking at the idea of replacing regular lawns with clover lawns because they don't need to be mowed, they don't use as much water, and they do provide forage for pollinators. So I think we're really interested in just wise use of water. And then we're also, in terms of biodiversity, we are planting a large variety, we're not a monoculture, we're planting a wide variety of plants. We're looking at how to make sure to plant perennials. We'd like to do some orchards so that we are sinking carbon because annual plants don't sink carbon as much as a perennial would. And then we just are generally, again, employing these regenerative farming techniques where we don't till, we use cover cropping. So there's just a lot of techniques that we're using to try to be as smart about resources as possible.
So it sounds like there are some challenges out there. What is the most challenging predicament of boundless landscapes?
Yeah, I think, so what I alluded to earlier was the psychology of lawns piece, and trying to move people past lawns. I think just changing people's habits and minds in terms of, the lawn piece, but then also, I think with climate change, a lot of people feel really stuck. They sort of know that there's all of this horrible stuff on the horizon and they know they should be doing more, but they often don't know what they can do that can actually make a difference. And so we're excited to sort of say, you know what, there's something, and people are really busy and they don't feel confident enough in many cases to grow their own food. And so we're excited to say, hey, all you need to do is give us access to your land. We'll invite you into being part of the solution without it taking too much of your time. The challenge is like inviting people to change how they think about their land, to change how they think about action, to change how they think about lawns. And so our job is to tell a compelling story. So I think that's the biggest thing, is to get the word out to people and to convince them that this is something worth investing in and being a part of. And what we found is that people are really, really enthusiastic, but with all endeavors that involve humans, what we think and feel doesn't always translate into action. So our challenge is making sure that people take this sort of enthusiasm that they feel about our model and then actually sign up to be a part of it.
So what would you do if there were not enough spaces or resources? For example, other countries that people don't usually own lawns?
Yeah, I think that this solution, the Boundless Landscape solution, is very much a reaction to the facts in America. And I think it would need to be adapted for other cultures and countries because this is really, we are responding to this lawn epidemic, and we're building a model that we think is a response to not just the lawns, but also the societal norms, the sense that like communities are disconnected. The teens are on their phones all the time. time and disconnected from nature, that neighbors don't know each other as much. And I think obviously you may find these same challenges in other places, and then in other places, in some places, you don't find those challenges to the same degree. And so I think coming up with a solution that is very much a response to a local community or culture is really important. And this again is a uniquely American model. But I think, but a country that maybe doesn't have this lawn epidemic, that's great. But probably the solutions would need to focus on other things like, public lands or indoor growing, but it's hard to know without knowing the specifics of different communities and cultures and what they need most. But then I guess I would also say that this connection to nature can happen, as I said earlier, in really small ways. I do a lot of canning and fermenting. So I make sauerkraut and kimchi and things like that. And for me, that process alone is a sense of connection, gives me a sense of connection to nature. And so I think part of it is coming up with solutions that in whatever small or large way invite people into that connection.
So in the end of this episode, do you have any tips for our audience to start with some actions if they are not able to be part of this project?
Yes, I think that eating local food when possible and seeing where it's grown is really important and something that a lot of people can seek out no matter where they are. I think getting to know your local farmers and supporting them is really important. We joined what we call here community supported agriculture. So it's a farm where community members buy in the winter. They all pay a lump sum of money to a local farmer. We act as sort of insurance for them. So we buy into the next season in the winter, and then they have enough money to do all the planting and growing. And then in the summertime, we go to the farm every week and we pick up a share of vegetables from them. And we've done that with our son since he was quite young. And the experience of, for me and my husband and for my son, of going to a farm, meeting the farmers, seeing the farming process, harvesting chickens or turkeys, harvesting tomatoes, all of those things. I think that just helped us all develop a deeper understanding of what it takes to be a farmer and what the process is and why it matters. So I think getting to know your local farmers. And then I just think everyone should grow something. I just remember the first time I grew something and I, again, took a seed, put it in some dirt and watched it grow, and it just blew my mind. And I think whether that's an herb pot in a window at your house or that you take a little part of your yard, and it can be tiny. I mean, our micro farms are 100 square feet, and I know a lot of people don't necessarily have that much space, but you can create a micro farm that's really, really, really small. And I think just to get over the fear of growing something is a huge benefit for everybody. So just grow something. And then I think there are so many amazing urban farming projects all over the world. And so trying to find something like that and maybe volunteering, because what we found is a lot of the people who volunteered with us and worked with us, they're just eager to learn because they are nervous to do it on their own. And so finding a local gardening, urban farming project is just a great way to also gain confidence. So we found with some of our teenagers, they then went home and said to their parents, okay, I'm going to turn our yard into a little micro farm, because they suddenly felt confident enough to do that. So I think those are all easy ways to start to build that connection.
Thank you, Mara. I think this is our episode today. Many stories that we'd like to hear from you more next time.
Yeah. If anyone's interested in following along with our progress, our website is boundlesslandscapes.com. And if anyone around the world is starting something and wants to just be in conversation with us, we've found that talking to other people who have similar goals and missions and learning from them, running ideas by each other, is a really helpful way to build something successful. So please feel free to reach out if anyone is trying to explore something similar.
Thank you, Mara.
Thank you so much.
So this is our episode for today. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You listened to episode 4 of the podcast Teachability, teaching about sustainable cities and communities. Until next time, And as always, don't forget to be a sustainable citizen.